One of the most notable figures to come from one of the near endless Earths within the Invincible Universe is a jacked, tyrannical, and downright despicable version of Mark Grayson. Oh, and he sports a mohawk too, which is pretty much pop culture for I'm a badass. Join us until the end of this video as we'll tell you the full story of this version of the half-Viltrumite superhero known to fans as Mohawk Mark. Before we begin, there are some spoilers ahead. The beginning of a much darker Mark Grayson. As is the way of alternate dimensions, the details of Mohawk Mark's youth pretty much goes along the lines of the original Mark Grayson. For one, he's well acquainted with the likes of Adam Eve and Rexplode in this universe, and he's part of the teen team too. Now, as you might have already known, the Adam Eve from the original Invincible Universe didn't exactly start off as OG Mark Grayson's love interest. She was in fact a long-term relationship with fellow superhero Rexplode until, well, he cheated on her with fellow Teen Team member Duplicate. Almost the same thing happens after Adam Eve's breakup in Mohawk Mark's world. In a nutshell, the two grew closer to each other. But unlike the original Mark Grayson, who bonded with Eve over their experiences about saving lives as superheroes in their world, there was just something quite different about Mohawk Mark. In this version of the Incredible Universe, Mark isn't some half-Viltrumite bleeding heart who wanted to become a superhero like his dad, Omni-Man, you know, before the whole revelation that Omni-Man was actually an alien conqueror. From the get-go, Mohawk Mark knew that he wasn't the same as all the other superheroes on his planet, much less its regular citizens. But instead of becoming a benevolent savior, Mohawk Mark got it in his head that he was actually superior to everyone else on Earth. He shouldn't bother saving these guys, they should just be on their knees worshiping him. At some point in time, Mohawk Mark discovered his father's true nature. The OG Invincible Universe had Omni-Man nearly killing his own son, but not in this world. In fact, Omni-Man was quite pleased that Mohawk Mark realized his true calling as a ruler and tyrant, so he drafted the boy to join him in his conquest to take over Earth. In doing so, Mohawk Mark would ultimately kill the rest of the world's superheroes, such as Rexplode, Robot, and the rest of the teen team. And as for Eve, well, let's just say things didn't end well, as the half-Viltrumite soup murdered her too for opposing their plans. Mohawk Mark's tour of terror. Mohawk Mark would then take out half of his world's premier geneticist tandem, the Mauler twins, destroying their cloning lab in the process and leaving the remaining Mauler on the run. There was a kink in their plans to rule over Earth when Omni-Man gets killed in this universe, but it was not nearly enough to derail him. By the end of his crusade, Mohawk Mark would successfully take over the planet and rule it with an iron fist. He'd use the Pentagon as his stronghold, enslave Earth's greatest scientists, and appoint other Viltrumites such as Anissa and Conquest as planetary overseers. Years would pass with Mohawk Mark as the ruler of Earth in the name of the Viltrumite Empire. The unsung years even saw him and his cronies capturing the superhero monster girl in this world, who ultimately became one of their slaves in the process. But it wasn't until a man with the power to hop between dimensions named Angstrom Levy, a supervillain hailing from one of the many Earths in the Invincible Universe, arrived on Mohawk Mark's world, that his plans for domination would surpass even that of his dead fathers. With Angstrom's arrival came an irresistible offer: help him destroy OG Mark Grayson, and in turn, Mohawk Mark would be able to expand his empire. Of course, Mohawk Mark accepted this, and he, along with the other villainous Marks from the other universes, would arrive on OG Mark Grayson's world and wreak havoc in what would be known as the Invincible War. During this invasion of OG Mark's Earth, Mohawk Mark first blew through the Stronghold, the Supermax prison housing Earth's superpowered villains, and made short work of everyone in there. Not even minutes passed after Mohawk Mark's rampage that OG Mark caught up to him and the two got into a classic fistfight. Ultimately, OG Mark would knock out Mohawk Mark when he smashed the tyrant's temples between his fists. But being knocked out doesn't mean dead, because only a day after the meeting, Mohawk Mark would continue ravaging this world and end up absolutely wrecking New York. Prisoner in another world. Now, the OG Mark Grayson and the superheroes of Earth didn't exactly win the Invincible War. No, it's just that the evil Invincibles, Mohawk Mark included, and Angstrom Levy had a disagreement and ended up fighting amongst themselves. Angstrom would ultimately settle the dispute with the evil Invincibles by trapping them in another dimension, and a desolate one at that. While marooned on this dead world, we get to see just how low Mohawk Mark and these other alternate Invincibles would sink in order to survive. survive. To put it simply, Angstrom stranded 8 evil marks in this dimension, but it took almost no time before there were only 2 of them left. If you guessed that they killed each other while trapped in this world, that's actually just half of it, because the whole truth is actually much more gruesome. Even a half Viltrumite has to eat, and being trapped on a dead world has quite limiting food options. Guess what's on the menu? Yep, it's evil Mark Grayson Tartar day in and day out. To Mohawk Mark's credit, he left the group after cannibalizing one of his peers, concluding that cannibalism is just disgusting. OG Invincible and Mohawk Mark team up. Eventually, Mark Grayson would find himself trapped in the same dimension as well. At this point, Mohawk Mark, who's been basically living as a hermit, free of all the cannibalism of his former colleagues, and another evil version of Invincible, popularly known as Sinister Mark, who basically ate all the others, are the only one left in this dimension. Sinister Mark would come across the OG Invincible, and in an unexpected turn of events, Mohawk Mark would come to OG's aid as they work together. Ultimately, Sinister Mark would get his comeuppance when Mohawk Mark, at the aid of OG Mark Grayson, bashed his head in. Sure, OG Invincible tried to stop him, but Mohawk Mark was just too furious to listen, especially when he remembered how Sinister Mark basically pulled his and all the other now dead alternate Mark's strings so that they'd literally eat one another. Angstrom Levy would open a portal that would send both OG Mark and Mohawk Mark to the original Invincible Universe. Now, Mohawk Mark might have worked with OG Invincible during their time on the Dead Dimension, but by no way has he forgotten what Angstrom did to him and the other alternate Marks. So, Mohawk Mark ended up in a scuffle with the multiverse-hopping villain. He almost kills Angstrom, but stops when OG Mark reminds him that he needs the dimension-hopping powers to get back to his home. By the time all was said and done, Angstrom decided to turn over a new leaf and stop being such a scheming scumbag. He freed OG Mark from captivity and let bygones be bygones, and he opened a portal to Mohawk Mark's own dimension so that he could go home. The end of Mohawk Mark. But Mohawk Mark is one vindictive half-Viltrumite. Instead of entering that portal and letting things go, he dragged Angstrom with him and made him his captive. In his world, Mohawk Mark would continually torture Angstrom in order to make him deliver on his end of their original deal, for Angstrom to open up portals to other dimensions that Mohawk Mark could conquer. However, the dimension-hopping ex-villain wouldn't do it, since he basically renounced being a supervillain. So like a true tyrant, Mohawk Mark pursued more persuasive methods to access Angstrom's powers. Specifically, he ordered his scientists to experiment on Angstrom's body with the hope of acquiring his powers. But hey, Mohawk Mark isn't exclusively evil, he's also very depressed. During this time, he started to long for Eve, who, as we mentioned, he killed before. So to remedy that, Mohawk Mark regularly hired hookers to dress up as Eve and live in his inner sanctum. Time passed, and OG Mark Grayson would find himself traveling to Mohawk Mark's universe with the help of Robot, OG Robot to be more specific. The reason behind this adventure was for OG Mark to rescue Angstrom of all people. While in Mohawk Mark's dimension, OG Mark and Robot successfully met with Mohawk Mark. Mohawk Mark told OG Mark that any bad blood between them had been forgotten, especially after they helped each other in the past. When OG Invincible asked Mohawk Mark what happened to Angstrom though, their relationship became strained yet again. Mohawk Mark revealed that he's been keeping the dimension-hopping ex-supervillain captive, tortured, and experimented on. OG Mark didn't take kindly to this, which honestly confused Mohawk Mark, since he knew that OG Mark vowed to kill Angstrom before. To his credit, OG Mark was pretty much conflicted with the whole deal. Sure, he hated Angstrom, but he didn't even think about torturing the dude if he spotted him. Mohawk Mark would admit that even he is surprised that OG Invincible is an honest-to-goodness superhero. He tells him that maybe it's all circumstantial, that if something bad enough would have happened or would happen to OG Mark, then he could be a tyrant like him. Unbeknownst to these two Mark Graysons, nor even anyone else in the original Invincible Universe, Robot has been making plans of his own to rule the world and turn it into his own version of utopia. And when he heard Mohawk Mark giving OG Invincible the slightest hint of his potential to be the world's ruler, Robot immediately registered this as a threat. So he lashed out and attacked both OG Mark and Mohawk Mark. First, Robot activated a sonic device that incapacitated them. He then proceeded to kill Mohawk Mark's scientists to eliminate any potential witnesses. And then, the killing blow. Robot shot a miniature bomb right into Mohawk Mark's mouth that blew up his head from the inside. When that was done, he then decided to maroon OG Mark in this dimension. He could have killed Mark too, but Robot has a certain attachment to him. As his final stroke that would make sure OG Mark couldn't follow him, Robot chopped off Angstrom's head too before leaving leaving Mohawk Mark's world and returning to the original Invincible Universe. With that came the end of Mohawk Mark.